Jake, what's up, man?
Hey, Scott. Doing super well. Nice to see you, brother.
Good to see you, brother. And I'm so excited to be having this conversation. Like I said, when we originally chatted, someone shared with me this LinkedIn photo of, hey, here's this guy who used to be a sales leader who's now living in the jungle, doing all kinds of cool spiritual things. And after we got reconnected with a former podcast guest, Zach Poitra, I knew that we needed to have this conversation. And so here we are, man. And maybe to ground the conversation, we could just do a quick cliff notes of your journey over the past decade that brought you to where you are today.
Absolutely. Yeah, so first of all, just like fired up, to be dropping in here with you. Was excited all day to chat. And yeah, okay, so to jump off there. So I grew up in the suburbs, not to go back to my whole like creation story and stuff like that, but I'm like, grew up in the suburbs outside of Toronto. I was a bright, well-rounded like kid growing up, went off to business school. And all the while I had been very like into spirituality, I would say from a very young age. I always envisioned my life unfolding in this way where I would achieve like society's definition of success or something because I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder to want to, do that. And then I would sort of shoot off, way left field and live some kind of life in the wilderness or something very mystical or something like that. I always like saw myself evolving that way from a really young age, even though I didn't know what it would be. And then I would say that I primarily explored spirituality through the perspective of plant medicine for a long time. So, high school, encountered cannabis. That's been a very important like ally and teacher in my life since then. Mushrooms, like I had various experiences, but the experiences I were having were a little, let's say, more, full on than what everyone has. Like there was something just so enchanting about this world, and it just completely like opened me up to really say like, wow, there's so much more out here to explore. Um, uh, so from like a young age in high school, I wanted to go to the jungle and drink ayahuasca and
It,
like learn to
you
become a shaman or
you
something.
are you are what they call karmically ripe, my friend.
Yeah, that's it. So I think I had some kind of stamp on me towards this path, let's say from like an early age. And then I did the business school route, and I got involved in an early stage startup as like the first employee in my first year of business school. So I was volunteering for a startup competition and I was just like hosting this team of early founders. They won the competition and then they wanted to work with me and have me like join onto the company and stuff. So I got involved pretty early on in the kind of SaaS ecosystem, although I didn't think of it as SaaS at first. I was just like, bright-eyed young young buck who wanted to like learn the ropes in terms of like how to build a software company and stuff like that. Um, and then I did that for about a decade. Eventually I graduated. I did that at three companies. I was a sales leader. But all the while, I was the one doing like plant medicine ceremonies, like at home, like on the side, or, like, and I was very like vocal about this part of my life within, family, friends, maybe even my company, but not so much like on LinkedIn or at that like level of scale. And then at some point I had this like dark night of the soul, type of moment where my health hit an all-time low. I was like full on workaholic, the typical story.
Oh yeah.
Life looked great from the outside, suffering on the inside. No healthy habits to regulate my nervous system, overworking, just kind of ran my health into the ground. So I ended up, yeah, just like burning out, but I see that as almost like, I was off course in terms of like my soul's purpose.
Right.
My gallbladder was full of gallstones. I was in and out of the hospital. I would have died if it wasn't for modern healthcare because I had an infection. They had to like eventually go in and remove some of these stones that were blocking my bile duct. So, I'll spare like all the gore, but just to say there was like a gory, dark night of the soul, like rock bottom health moment. And
can we pause on this for a second?
yeah,
Because I think I've experienced this too, where essentially you get redirected by the malfunction of the body. And I would be interested to hear, like, obviously, as you were going through that, that must have been quite difficult, but it sounds like your perspective on why that is has evolved. And so, what do you make of that?
so the first thing is it's through the wound that the light enters, right? And so that's some famous words from Rumi. You know, he's left a lot of gems behind for us. But also think about a dark seed. You know, it needs to go into the moist, dark earth to crack open in order to then be sent on its path towards the light, right? So this is the archetype of like the wounded healer. And it's necessary to reach that in order to so let's back up, I guess. It becomes necessary if we don't heed the warning calls prior, right? But I think we've all got like this one big deep one where like we're bound to sort of get like rough and tumbled a bit from life. You know, it seems like every person goes through some, you know, it's like the hero's journey, right? But I would also say that our body speaks to us through the language of what we call symptoms, right? And
That's
so we
right.
have some form of consciousness where we're placing our mind's awareness on different things. Our body is more in tune perhaps with the subconscious, what we may call subconscious layers or unconscious, just being a polarity, like conscious. Think of like a sine wave going from unconscious to conscious, and like our body provides us messages that escalate in severity, um, you know, to let us know things that our consciousness and our awareness ought to be brought onto, basically. And like anything, like a business decision, or there might be a lot of sellers watching this just based on like Scott's background and my background. People don't make changes until the consequences of the status quo have become sufficiently stark, right? And so it's why we can like know that we need to like improve our diet and whatever, but like until you know it seems worth the cost benefit of analysis of like going through that discomfort. And the longer the thing is neglected, the more discomfort required to get back on track. And so like yeah, you're just playing a game of like when, basically,
Yeah,
with all that stuff. So those are my thoughts on that.
I completely agree. I think, it took me a multi-year healing journey to recognize that, yeah, the symptomology of the body is almost a communication instrument, from a deeper identity. And when my interpretation is like, we kind of come here, we sign up to come into this experience to have certain experiences, to learn certain things, to evolve in a certain way. And when we deviate too far off of that, it's often one of the ways that life can make us aware of that, like sound the alarm, is through illness, is through symptomology. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, it's you obviously have to believe in a requisite to get to that is, like you said, things not going well. I don't think the average person is thinking like this. I also think you have to believe in reincarnation, and maybe even have some type of experiences of expanded consciousness to recognize that this is kind of what is going on. But I think on the flip side of that, when you get to that recognition, it's so empowering because it allows you to create meaning for your suffering, right? It allows you to not just be like, this sucks. Like, why is everyone else feeling great and like living like a hooligan? And I'm over here meditating and feeling like shit. Like, God knows I felt like that. But I think one of the other things that's kind of interesting and fascinating, and I don't know a ton about the archetype of the wounded healer, but in my own experience, part of that lesson, part of the recognition of the physical suffering was that I needed to go through that in order to be able to serve.
absolutely. So in the shamanic tradition, illness is viewed as initiation. So it's requisite. They wouldn't even be considered to be like a chosen shaman in many cultures unless they underwent some severe form of mysterious, illness. And often it's the quest for a solution that then leads them towards uh, uncovering, and it's their own medicine in their own self-healing that then becomes the medicine that they are able to offer, to the rest of the world, right? um, but it's also like we can take it down a layer. Instead of being like metaphysical and consciousness and spirituality, it's also just like problems beget solutions, and like um, there needs to be a certain amount of decay and destruction for a new thing to need to be created, basically. So it's like um yeah, like you got to have a flat tire to like go to the bike shop sometimes, and then like at the bike shop maybe you like upgrade your bike in other ways that you weren't gonna just for the flat tire, like that type of thing.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think it's like people ask all the time about to me about like spiritual evolution and stuff, and I'm just kind of like, your life kind of has to get jacked up
Yeah.
in order for you to embark on this journey. I'm not sure that you can even conjure it, right? It kind of needs to be um, things kind of need to go south around in the world around you, which is kind of gets into things like karma and stuff, and why that happens to some people and why that doesn't. But I want to keep going, charging through your story.
Yep.
So you're at a tech company, you're doing this, you're interested in all these things. When did you feel the call that you needed to go all in on this stuff?
Yep. So to answer that, there was a significant moment that occurred in the Andes Mountains, actually in the Cordillera Blanca region, like more in the north of Peru, close to a town called Huaraz. I went there to a retreat center, actually with my sister, when I was in my last year of university. So I was like 21 at the time, and we went for an ayahuasca retreat. And so we worked with tobacco, we worked with ayahuasca. There was 4 ceremonies that I participated in, and we worked with some tree barks that were part of a dieta that we were doing. And like during this retreat, I just had this overwhelming sense of knowing. One morning, and you can relate to this, Scott, like after ceremony, um, during the integration circle, I was just bawling like a little baby. Like I never cried like that. I wasn't sad. I was so happy. I was crying and crying and crying, and it was like overwhelming release. And I was crying because I realized like a huge part of my life's purpose and how it like integrated all these various sort of interests and skill sets that I had felt. And so on this retreat, I just had this overwhelming sense of knowing that a huge part of my life's work would be to hold space in a similar way for people, and specifically to actually create the retreat center, do the business like behind it, like everything, and then also walk the shamanic path to learn, to be a practitioner of these. You could call it, they refer to it often as a ciencia divina, so like a divine science. So I think it's both art and science in this way. And so I had this strong calling then, and in one of the visions that I had during an ayahuasca ceremony, I saw this map, basically, and it was a continent, very clearly a continent, that looked like Africa. It had the shape of Africa, this kind of elephant shape. And on the sort of holographic looking continent, there was a crosshairs, like a sniper rifle, on the top left, portion of it that was kind of like glowing and just showing me like this clear spot. Um, and then beside it there was a name, like letters, and it said Avery. And so my rational mind at the time tried to, of course, uncover some meaning in this symbology, and because it was a very poignant, like distinct vision, I drew it in my journal after the ceremony. I still have that journal with like the page of this Africa looking continent with the bullseye in the name. And then like later I go through life. At one point I have a girlfriend. She's from Morocco, which is the north of Africa. So my rational mind is like, oh, this was showing me the
This is
location
it.
of my future lover, my wife, and this name Avery, maybe that's the name of like a baby girl we're gonna have, or like I'm trying to like solve the ayahuasca vision. Um, and like 8.5 years went by from that first vision. It wasn't, her obviously. And then my health deteriorates. So fast forward, I'm in startup world, working as a sales leader, early stage companies, ran my health into the ground, miserable on the inside, workaholic, that type of stuff. And all the while I had stayed very like shamanic, let's say, in my own way. Um, but then I was like, okay, like, and I almost like was in and out of the hospital, not going to die in today's standards, but would have been close to a death scenario if we didn't have like modern medicine. So it caused a lot of reflection. And at the same time, all of the like medicine music, the Icaros, like that's all I wanted to listen to. Like, and it was like just right when COVID hit and stuff and things were like shutting down. And I was like in my own world, just like inside, like doing like shamanic journeys and like just really feeling like all this stuff come back in full force. So I'm like, all right, like now's the timing. I can feel it. Like I can't continue more with this sales leader stuff. Like love it. I love it. I love sales and that whole world, but I just couldn't continue. My heart, couldn't do it. So I'm like, all right, now's the time. So I found online a retreat center that was for sale. Um, and it was COVID. They couldn't like continue to run their business. And I had always been inspired by this guy, Hamilton Souther. He's one of the original pioneers, kind of North American gringo dude who went down to the Amazon following like a calling, and one of the very first like Westerners to have this type of apprenticeship and training like passed on to him. So I had always followed him, his journey, all the content I could consume online. So I was really like into his story. It was super inspiring. And he always talked about the small village where he ventured deep in the jungle, and that's where he met his teacher and stuff like that. And so I had been like watching some of his stuff, searching for a retreat center, feeling all this come back, getting ready to like make this change in my life. And then I'm like, wait, Genaro Herrera, that village, like, wait, isn't that? And then I look at the retreat center and it's the same village where the retreat center was, for sale. So I was like, whoa, like sick, like it'll be the same village that he learned. Like, that's amazing. I'm going to go there. So that like made the decision for me. I called the owners, did like a WhatsApp call with them, made a deposit just like in good faith, like on the place after like seeing it through video. And then started like exiting from the company I was at. That was a longer process. I moved out of the city I was in back to my parents' house, like packed up all my stuff, like, and got ready to just move to the Amazon
Wow.
jungle basically. Yeah.
So just I wanted to zoom in on this. So you just bought a retreat center online during COVID
Kind of.
without even going there. Man, that's some conviction right there.
That's it, exactly, right.
Can
And
you can you just like humor us with like, people are interested in this stuff. Like,
yeah.
what is the price range of something like that you invested in?
So let's say in US dollars, because I come from Canada, um, I probably bought the place for around 70K or something like that. And that was
Wow.
after 2 generations of like Western owners. So if I were to go down there, buy the land and create this place myself, it would cost less than that. Um, but that would be a tremendous amount of time, and mistakes and things like
Yeah.
that, right? So it would actually cost more in reality, right? It's one of those like buy then build type approaches, right, to entrepreneurship, right? I was like, let me just deepen myself on this path by like inheriting something that's already existing. And also, it's a forcing function. So, like, when you're doing ascend in life that's just like so epic, it's a form of like increasing the stakes of like cancellation, basically, right? It's a form of like closing all the back doors, so that none of your energy is leaking towards a destiny that isn't the destiny that you're orienting your being behind. basically, right? And like putting a bunch of coin into something is like a way energetically like to do that, even if you're still like afraid in many levels, right? That is a forcing function. um, so my plan was to like head down to the Amazon, go like up to the shaman's house and just like be like, here I am, like I'm ready to be an apprentice, like let's do this, right? But I went down there first, to meet the owners, see the place, and like complete the payment, and then like do like a passing of the baton, basically, in terms of like relationships down there, learning how to run the place, all those things, right? Meeting some folks in the village, like. So I went down.
Did you speak Spanish? Because I
No, I
imagine.
didn't. So I didn't even speak Spanish at this point.
Whoa.
Like, yeah, so like I'm like in the middle of the Amazon jungle. Eventually, like they left, right? And it's just me, like with like my new friend Eric, who's like the most amazing human being, jack of all trades, like jungle man, who's my main like partner in the retreat center. Um, like just like trying to talk to him and like figure out like what we're gonna do, basically, right? Using like Google Translate and like just like human communication, nonverbal.
Lots of gesticulation.
Yeah, exactly. And like I'd done like a bit of Duolingo before and stuff, right? But I didn't speak Spanish by any means. Um, and it's quite different in the jungle in terms of like how people speak too, right? So um, yeah, like sink or swim, right? Like fully in there, don't speak the language. So I went to meet the owners, and the second generation of owners were these British fellas, and they bought it from a guy from France initially. And he created the retreat center because he left France to learn to become a shaman in the jungle. So similar path as like, you know, Hamilton or Zach, who we spoke about. He wanted to go do that. So he went there. He was the pioneer who like bought the land and like built the first little house, and then like made more money to make it bigger, and like did all that. And the whole time he was doing dietas, learning this shamanic path, learning to become a curandero, a maestro, an ayahuasquero, vegetalista. There's different names depending on what you're learning. So I was really excited to meet him. Because he started the place, and he met a woman in the jungle, and then had a child, and then they moved out of like the deep jungle to raise their kid. So that's why he sold the place. So the British guys bought it from him, and they ran it more as like an adventure hostel. The reason I bring him up is when I first got down there, it was to meet the British guys, and they told me, "Oh, Jake, we just got notice from like the previous owner. His name's Alex, that he was coming to our village with his wife and children, and he was asking if he could stay in Casa del Otorongo. That's the name of it. Otorongo is the jaguar spirit in Quechua. So he's asking if he can stay here because it will be nostalgic for him. They built the place, of course, right? But we told him he needs to ask you because you're going to be the new owner, right? So they're like, we're going to intro you on WhatsApp. So I started talking to him on WhatsApp. He explains he wants to come. I'm like, of course, like mi casa, su casa, hermano, like this whole thing. And I'm super excited to meet him. So then I find out his last name is Auvray. So he has a French last name, which is the exact name that I saw in an ayahuasca vision 8.5 years earlier beside a map, which was not Africa, which was South America, because they have this same sort of like elephant type shape. And exactly on the map where I drew the crosshairs is exactly where the retreat center is in the jungle. And his name was beside it. You know what I mean? I always get chills when I say it. Yeah,
Holy
yeah.
moly.
And when I first received the vision, he had just started building the place. Like it didn't even fully exist. And he received a vision from ayahuasca to build the place in the shape he built it, and he built it in a cross. So it's this massive house that's 3 floors in a cross shape, which is totally like never really built in the jungle. Um, and now it's come full circle where I'm studying and being initiated in the shamanic traditions of the Andes, the high Andes, the Laika, the Quero tribe that I got introduced, through Zach's work too. And it's all about like the 4 directions and these 4 power animals that are the organizing principles of each of these cardinal directions, like northwest, southeast. There's the serpent, the jaguar, the hummingbird, the eagle or condor. And the entire cosmovision functions around these four. And like the retreat center I have is in the shape of that, and it's called Casa del Otorongo, and this medicine wheel wasn't really a big part of like the work he was doing at the time, so it's like it's all aligned in some crazy way. So yeah, that's like a bit of the origin story.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. And I guess, how does that impact your belief on things like space and time, prophecy? Like that experience is pretty
Yeah,
wild, right?
yeah, yeah, because it makes you think, okay, is everything just predetermined by cause and effect, right? Which a scientist would say, yes, like it's causal determinism, right? It's just like a chain, a butterfly ripple effect of every action having a reaction. That's like cause and effect, which is one of the laws of like how the universe works, right? There's cause and effect. But in the shamanic perspective, instead of being a slave to time, you become a master to time, and you realize that time exists in different expressions, and so there's different types of time even. And so you could view time as an arrow, as a linear function, very cause and effect based, which it is in some way. But you could also, from a different perspective, view time as a cycle, which it is, right? We do see
Mm.
this spiral, continued spiral. um, we see the way the sun, the way the moon, everything ebbs and flows according to these rhythms. There is a cyclicality to time that's undeniable, that we embrace in the Western world as well. Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, right? So that's another way of looking at time. And then there is also like outside of time, and then you could view time as a web, a spider's web. So it has all these like different spirals, but there's also threads that you can ride in between to access different parts in the web of time. And then you can also step outside of time. And shamans, when they work, they're working at a level of perception where they're in a timeless, spaceless place. And that's why it's not even the right word, but and that's why like this work can be done at a distance, healing, things like that. So to bring this all together for people, think of your life as a momentum tunnel, okay? And so that's very cause and effect. That's like time as an arrow or as a tunnel, okay? And there's this tunnel, and a portion of it is in the past. And then there's present right here. And then there's a future, which is like getting figured out. And then there's all these strands, which are like the momentum caused by the cause and effect relationship of everything that's happened in the past, right? Where were you born? What relationships did you have? What decisions did you make? All these things. So then we have all these potential timelines, but there's a range of probabilities here. Most things are likely to continue along your momentum tunnel, right? Because that's the direction that you currently have momentum in. And so most likely, if the present is here, the future for you will lie within this like tube that you've got going on, basically. And when you go to see a psychic, what they're doing is they're channeling by opening, themselves and tuning into a certain frequency that is giving them data and information. They're being able to sense through their five senses, like possible probabilities, the most probable future states for yourself. But what the shaman's concerned with doing is stepping outside of time because sometimes we need to alter our momentum, right? Like, and in
Hmm.
business, how do we do that? And like, there's this whole momentum thing. We like momentum when it's on our side, but we like hate momentum when it's like going against us. And that's why changing habits is so hard, all these things. So where it gets interesting is, how do we change our momentum to access a timeline over here, like a future version of ourselves? Like before I was like sales leader, fiance, condo, German Shepherd dog, like my momentum was like going this way, but I made this big shift. And how did I do that? Because when you're moving really fast, so what's the equation of momentum? It's mass times velocity squared divided by 2. That's the scientific equation of what dictates your momentum. So the two variables in momentum are your mass and your velocity. So the way you make changes to your momentum is either by tweaking one of those variables. So if you're going on the highway really fast with all this stuff in the bed of your truck or in the trailer behind you, and you want to make a right hand turn at 90 degrees, you can do that at that velocity and at that mass. But what's going to happen? Tons of shit's going to fly out of your truck. It's going to like get destroyed. And like maybe you pull off the maneuver and you're like okay in the truck and maybe you die, right? And so what do you need to do if you want to make a big change in life and you want to affect and move towards your destiny and access a possibility that is outside of the probabilities of where you're headed, is you need to make changes to the equation. So you need to change mass and you need to change velocity. So some people can't change mass that easily. They have a wife, they have 3 kids, they have like they're like the CEO of this big company. Like, so like mass is kind of hard to change. They've got the cargo they've got. They can chuck some things out, but they can't chuck that much out. So what can they do is they can change velocity. And what's actually better to change? Velocity is squared. So a change to your speed has a more significant effect than a change to your mass on your momentum. So like that's the trick. That's why you go on a vision quest and
So
experience stillness.
can I ask you a question? So when you say change velocity, like practically, like what is that?
Moving slower in life and having more quiet moments of stillness and contemplation, and reducing the literal speed at which you experience life. So it'd be like meditation, being present, walks in the forest, going on a retreat, like taking that solitude. So like all these like practices that we like know about, but the amount of stillness required to make it depends on the magnitude of shift that you're trying to make as well, right?
Mm.
Um, and so like that's why like a lot of people go and have like an experience at a retreat that's like transformational, and then they alter the trajectory of their life after that because they created the time and space to reduce their velocity. And then they also typically undergo practices like whatever it is. We're talking plant medicine here. Let's say it's a plant medicine, let's say it's an ayahuasca retreat, and ayahuasca helps to remove a ton of mass from the person as well. And so then they're in this really nimble state to make these changes. Yeah.
Would you define mass as like self-concept, consciousness, kind of?
Emotions, fears,
Mm.
like junk, but not all of
Yeah.
it's junk. Also, right? Some of it's things that they're like burdens that you've chose to carry based on at some point what you wanted, right? And you may not want to chuck all of them out, right? Like, um, and so like what I'm really interested in too is like not everyone in the modern context, there are many human beings who want to alter their trajectory for a more positive destiny, but they're not playing with the ability to change their mass or velocity that much. And you could say you always have the choice, you always have to make those hard choices, but like they're looking for a more elegant way to do that, right? And that's where
Right.
like this future state comes in of like building retreats, experiences, education for conscious professionals, people that have both a foot like firmly in like the business world, but also are on this like spiritual seeking like path. How do you make it more accessible? How do you help someone like decelerate their velocity and then like accelerate again after? Like instead of just like boom, they have this like jarring experience and they're shot out of their normal life and then they're like, whoa, all this stuff's off track. Like, and then they have to go back in and integrate. But it's like there's all these massive shifts to make and stuff. So there's like cool models that technology of today, all these things like now open up to make possible in terms of like how do we serve up transformational experiences to people that are like meet them where they're at with the mass available that they can shed and the velocity that they're able to reach, sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. I think super interesting points and references. And yeah, it's my experience that when most people think about changing their future, they do think very in that very linear timeline, right? They're operating as like, okay, well, if there's X input and I times that by 2, then I'm going to get double the return, right? And it's very predictable, I would say, and it's very
Yeah.
realistic because it's based in a past context. It's a constant use of the past to answer future questions and potentials.
Yep.
And for me, this is why you talked about the formless state that a shaman goes into, which I believe, at a certain level of consciousness becomes accessible to you. You can really create from that blank space. And I think, it was actually one of Alberto's videos. Like, this feels like it's very emerging for me right now, where it's like, okay, dude, like, you've done the shadow cleaning to really, really reduce the mass. You're in a pretty, like, you got a lot of space now. And like, it's time to start to like step into that power to figure out like, what is that story you want to write? And you have permission to do that. You know what I mean? Like, you're not a bad spiritualist by doing that. And that was like a big thing for me, because so much of like the surrender and programming around God as some kind of domineering dominion force versus like a fundamental part of who and what we are. Like, that's like a really, really big unlock. And it's just something I hope more people in business, professional world, like, they become in touch with, man. It's just electric.
I got chills. It's funny you said the word electric. Yeah, I got chills on that because the part, especially where you said like giving yourself permission, right? Because we're obsessed and addicted to, in the West, working on ourselves, working on our businesses, improving things, right? Like the self-help aisle, like just go on LinkedIn, like everything's about that, right? And yeah, especially like the listeners here, people who are industrious, very conscientious, we sort of braid our identity in the world with the way that we serve the world, right? Not everyone does to some degree, but some more than others, right? There are some that just, and so like, yeah, we just are obsessed with working on ourselves, and at a certain point, it's like, so this is the quote on your LinkedIn. It says like learning to dance in the rain, something like that, right? Dance in the storm or something, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
it's like you
yeah,
can. It's like, yeah, it's basically like learning how to, like, instead of like learning how to like ride the wave or something, it's like learn how to dance in the rain. I don't know, but
yeah,
it's
but it's
going with the flow of life is the point.
exactly, yeah. So there's that, and then there's also like nothing's ever going to be perfect. So like having a beautiful garden and being a great gardener of your sacred garden, which is a metaphor, doesn't mean having a perfectly weed-free space where you've just pulled out every single weed and it's meticulous and it's barren and there's nothing there, right? It's like, at what point do you start planting new beautiful things in your life and cultivating your medicine? And so that's why this concept of the medicine wheel from the Andean cosmovision is really potent. In the South, in Serpent, you're healing your physical body a lot. As you move to the West, to Otorongo, to the Jaguar, you move into the mental emotional layer. And then eventually, and making peace with your past and ancestors and many things we won't quite go into. And then you reach hummingbird medicine. And that is about like drinking from the sweet nectars of life. Like, what do hummingbirds do? They just like dip their beak into all these amazing flowers. There's a lot of beautiful things to hummingbird medicine, but part of it is like, look, like your garden's not going to be perfect ever. And at what point do you shift from just like trying to improve yourself to like sending it to the next epic adventure, basically, you know?
Yeah, yeah. It's like, to use your metaphor, it's like at some point, and I think of the like weeding the garden as like shadow work. It's like at some point you got to start planting shit. Like, you can't just have like a pile of pristine dirt. Like, you
Yeah.
need to step into your authorship and start planning things. And the shadow work will make it really helpful to be okay when, maybe one of your plants doesn't turn out how you thought it would. But, hearing you talk about the other thing, commentary that is coming up for me is like hearing you talk about that kind of snake, and I forget what the second wheel
Jaguar.
is, Jaguar, hummingbird. It
Yep.
also sounds pretty similar trajectory to the chakra system, where like you get into, you you kind of, the first three chakras are very much in the physical realm, the heart, the throats when you kind of get into the manifestation, the beauty, like the spiritual domain. And so very, it sounds like what I love when I discover like different spins and different identifications of a similar concept or trajectory of the human experience, that come from vastly different places that probably weren't talking to each other when they, I guess, got these downloads or came up with them or whatever you want to call the formation process.
100%. And I think that that's spot on, is that it is that the jaguar and serpent are associated with the lower chakras, and that the colibri or the hummingbird and the condor or the eagle are associated with the higher chakras. And the work, your ability, that's why it's like first things first is like doing the lower chakra work, because it's that work that then allows, think of a tree. You got a nice little tree beside me. A tree has a trunk, and the trunk is a tree's axis. And what is an axis? It's a tube or a channel of energy between positive polarity, which is a sky, and the light, right? Great spirit, father sky up above, the sun. The sun is what the plant wants to reach. But then that's the negative polarity. It's the feminine, it's the earth. It's where it has its roots in, and that's also needed. And think of trees have chakras too, but they can move. And those chakras in the tree trunk, imagine like all the lower stuff is clogged. Like the signal, the like radio signal of like information coming in is like getting stuck, and food and nutrients are not being able to go like up and down, and so like a tree is basically a neuron. A tree, if you look at a neuron, look at a diagram of neuron, someone who's watching, Google it, and then look at a tree, and they're the exact same like architecture. A tree is a neuron in the brain of Mother Earth, basically. And so like its ability to do what a neuron does, like receive information and like send signals and stuff, has to do with how clear the axis is, right? And what happens to a lot of spiritual seeker types is we lose our axis because we become ungrounded with the roots, because we just want to do all the like spiritual
Yeah.
things and bypass everything, and it's all rainbows and butterflies, and that's where you see people demonizing like lower things, like their animalistic desires, like they're wanting to indulge in something, or like a lot of people even think making money is negative, or and so they end up like they don't have an axis. They're not rooted and grounded. And we've all met people like this. I mean, we've probably all been there ourselves, right? Where they're this
I've
blessed
been there.
soul, yeah, but they're just like all over, right? And they're not grounded. And so I think in order to bring a lot of these things into the light again, this spiritual work, shamanism, metaphysics, energetic medicine, all this stuff, like we require examples of people that are both grounded and, high vibe, so to speak. And yeah, and like the oscillation between positive and negative is unavoidable. It's required. And so everyone wants to raise their vibration. That's what we hear everything about in the spiritual communities, like raise your vibe, like, but it's like you need to lower your vibration in order to evolve and grow. It's like
Yeah.
maybe your body's craving like that certain food, and your head's like, no, that's junk food, that's not as healthy. It's like your body wants that density of energy because it needs to down gear. That's how it works. That's how it goes into the bottom part, the valley of the sine wave. After you climb the mountain, you need to descend the mountain, go in the valley, and freaking enjoy and celebrate a bit, and get into life's indulgence in the sweet valley where everything grows before you're gonna like send the next mountain,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Powerful metaphor. And so many good points. I mean, I think like, and I have, the way that I like to think about it is like, you need to, if you want to increase your upper limits or your capacity for experience, you need to also do the work downstairs, right?
Yep.
You need to do the shadow work. You need to do that. And moreover, like my experience, which has been an incredibly energetic and energetically intense experience, like I've tried to do things like just eat plants, and it's actually not good for me at
Yeah,
times.
me
So
too.
I need to calibrate, because I need to ground, right? It's too energetically sensitive to just eat like that. And so this is kind of where like tuning into what the body needs, tapping into your body's intuition, learning how to talk to your body
Yep.
becomes incredibly valuable. And yeah, I just think there's a lot of shitty advice out there
So much.
about people telling like what you need to do to evolve. It's, but we are all our own gurus, dude. We all need to find our own truth.
Exactly.
And so you have to be an experimentalist.
Yeah, and at a certain point, it's like you respect teachers, you learn from them, you remain humble, you embrace the beginner's mindset, but you also don't put anything on a pedestal or anyone. And at a certain point, you need to put your teachers in the fire, and you become your source of, the most profound wisdom is the one that comes from you, right?
Yeah.
Bar none. Like Russ, the rapper, he has a cool line where he's like, "My advisor is my gut. Don't you ever interrupt." Which I like. I just love. I mean, it's from like a pump up kind of like perspective, but yeah. And we gain confidence in that relationship in terms of listening to our heart and our inner voice, right? Um,
Yeah. That too is an experimentation process. Because you need the verifiable evidence that it's okay to trust it. So you need to start to take progressively bold steps of when you actually tune into that, like putting it into practice, like, oh, okay, cool, I can go a little bit deeper. Oh, I can go a little bit bigger. I can go a little bit bigger. And then eventually, at least what I've realized, I'm like, this is the safest shit to do. Is to trust. There's actually no better source of information than the true self, whatever you want to call that deep voice in the stillness.
exactly.
A question I do want to touch on is this. I know this is something that we're both passionate about, is this idea of the conscious professional. And if you feel called to uplift global consciousness, we need people that are not just sitting in an ashram in India or in a retreat center in Peru and meditating all day. We need people that are grounded in the world, achieving, but also evolving, living a heart-centered life. I'd love to hear your perspective on what you think that archetype looks like and how you think we can help people get there.
Yeah. So what does it look like? I'd say someone like you, Scott, I think like you very much embody, this type of archetype. And like many are striving for it, but I think you need enough passes of the pendulum from side to side. So like, whoa, way spiritual, became ungrounded, like boom, focus on the business, like maybe too much to the point like I lost meaning and my soul is like void of, fulfillment. And then like, whoa, like a different retreat or something. And then like, and eventually like the swings are a little more groovy.
Yeah.
And like the tendency a human being has is like so say someone's like in the professional world closed-minded to spirituality, and then they have some sort of awakening, and then they're like sent off on this like spiritual awakening and they're learning all these new things. They start to demonize where they were before, like, oh wow, I was so like that world I was in, that was so like bad. And sure, it reached a point where you had to evolve from it. So it was bad, but bad and good are just contextual phrases that are better replaced by like optimal and suboptimal or something like that, because it's just contextually need to change. But like you see people, they get on the spiritual path, they start thinking like business is bad, capitalism is bad, like shamans should be like free and like it's all like love and butterfly, and it requires like passing go enough times because that's the process of reconciling. It's the dance of polarity. It's like the
Mm.
spiral of DNA. DNA has negative and positive polarity. That's why it spirals
It's
forward.
it's a gradual oscillation upwards, right? In
Exactly.
order to
And
go up, it needs to go both ways.
based on magnetism and based on electricity, right? And that is what drives things forward. And so you need to experience enough tension and conflict between the two poles in order to be able to reconcile them. And so what I think is really cool, but part of what needs to get reconciled is your identity. So like, because part of you identifies with the role as like founder, startup founder or something, but then like part of you identifies as like, you know, shaman or something, right? And so like, how do these two become friends and see the good in each other and like do like a handshake in the middle and like join forces basically? Um, and so, but a big part of it today is that like there's this identity thing, and there's a lot of people that are far afield on either side, and there's less examples of people that are this well integrated, um, person basically. And I also think that like because the world has become disenchanted with like branded religions, not the whole world, let's say Western modern audience, leaning younger, there seems to be like a disenchantment, right? People are like reluctant to like say their religion or like things like that, right?
There actually, I actually just did this research. There is the data shows it. I think there's been an 11% decrease in the number of people that identify with a religion in the
Yeah,
past decade.
makes sense.
Um,
And they're
so it,
identifying spiritual now and stuff like that. What does
yeah,
that mean? It seems to be the word we've chosen for like mystical, unseen, soul level stuff, right? But yeah, like so we go on this journey and we want to, but because we've lost faith in the establishment of religion, we don't have this spiritual, like this way of exercising our spirituality. And so like I'd say entrepreneurs have become like the modern day spiritual guru basically, in the Western world in some way, just in like a archetypal like role that's being played. Like people are like into Steve Jobs, or they're into like
mm,
following like Zuck, or like these people became like, and all of them at that level have some integration in order to achieve what they have, of like look at Steve Jobs or something, very proficient in business, but like very much an outside the box thinker, right? And like a very much a mysticism to him in terms of like the way he creates, the perspective he has on the world. So like I think that what's happening today is we have many people who are hungry for an understanding of how they fit into the interconnected like web of life, and the leaders they look to are these like entrepreneurial figures. And the interesting polarity is like in the Western world, we think that like the answers, we need to go out and seek. That's what we so it's that paradigm. It's like I'm gonna go travel the world and have these adventures and find like meaning in life, or like let's set sail to the sea, Christopher Columbus, and let's find the new land out there, and it's adventure and it's going outside yourself to find meaning in life. Whereas the paradigm of the East, of the Pacific versus the Atlantic, because this is a polarity we can see in the world, they're about going inward. They're about there's nowhere you need to go. Where you are where you need to be. Just meditate, go inward. That's where all the answers lie. And so what's needing to happen today for our generation of people that are like at this evolved consciousness where they're like proficient in the Western world, but they're longing for more spirituality, but like meditating in like a cave for like half your life just doesn't fit with like being like an entrepreneur. It's that you need to integrate the best of both worlds. And so you need to equally set your eyes on an adventure and something, a vehicle, a mission in the external world, but you're equally seeking your vision and your navigation system from the internal. And like what's the skill set of how to do that, like and all of those things that come with that. That's what I'm excited to help like educate people on and hold space for, and stuff like that. um
I
so
love it,
yeah.
man. I mean, we're so on the same page about it. It's To me, it's so obvious that the actual most transformative people in the world are tapped into this, but it's definitely not the predominant narrative. And I think the way that we shift that, and thankfully, I think things like plant medicine coming online are helping accelerate this. But the way that we shift that is, yeah, you have to have people in the world that are out there as exemplars of this, right? That are actually out there talking about it, that are comfortable sharing this part of themselves that, so many people for a long time, it's like, this is the part of yourself you didn't bring to work.
Yeah.
This is the part you didn't talk about on LinkedIn. You didn't do that. Like, but like the people that are, and the other thing is, like, a lot of people that are out there talking about it, they don't really have the credit. They don't really have the credentials of achievement that society puts on a pedestal often, so there needs to be kind of both. And then I think what you're describing too, where there these containers, these education centers, retreats, there's so many different formats where people can learn how to harmonize it all, right? And that's I think that's the big thing with spirituality, is eventually it's about just continuous both ands, and not either ors, and moving beyond the polarities. But you have to go. I think you're right. You got to go through a lot of polarity to get there.
Yes. And once you get there, you'll think you're there, but you're like, let like let me transcend, because what happens is people get stuck on this where they're like, cool, so like what Scott's saying, and this isn't what you're saying, but is like, let's transcend polarity, right? Like, let's like step outside the game of like this and that, and like, you know what I mean, like, to a degree, right? But what you'll find is that that's like a very nihilistic like
It could,
perspective, which so then it becomes, no, let's partake fully in the game, and let's partake fully in the practice of this great dance of polarity. And so then it becomes giving yourself the permission to get a little carried away on one side, and then get a little carried away again on the other, and your threshold of carried away has perhaps been like reined in, but you always need to reach the slight too much for it to then be like relevant and even possible to, like, you know what I mean? Like, the pendulum swings the energy that it has based on the momentum going in this direction, and it's only going to change until it needs to. And so like people are like then it becomes Alan Watts. It just becomes like, sing and dance while the beautiful music is playing, right? And don't forget to do that. And that's hummingbird medicine too, where it's like, you know, understand the polarity, but then don't be like, okay, so like I don't need to like go full gas on that, because like that's just like it's like, no, like you go fully in it, and like you take a stance on certain things, and you know, because that's just the way of continuing to play your role in the like conflict creation of like the way fractal patterns of life like articulate themselves, you know. It's like um you know, anyway, but
yeah,
like
I think, another way it is that there needs to be conflict for there to be evolution.
exactly.
Like,
And like playing the game, participating fully, um and being able to zoom out and detach, but not just becoming like, all right, like screw the game then, you know.
yeah,
A lot of people
well,
get stuck there.
totally. I do think there is like a tremendous amount of confusion and apathy when people are like, okay, well, moving beyond polarity. I think kind of my observation is more like in the concepts that we believe oppose each other.
Yeah,
It's recognizing them as just concepts. Like, yeah,
exactly.
like the idea that you can, like, you either can be a business person or you can be spiritual, and it's like, well, who said that? Right?
Yeah,
It's just conditioning. It's just programming, and you see it. The more you see that, the more it allows you to say, wait a second, I can make room for all of these things.
yeah, yeah, like
Um,
there are no truths, there are only half truths, including that statement, right?
right, right. And I think And I think, there is like a devil in the details, like context component of that, where it's like, okay, that doesn't mean that you can just go be a ruthless capitalist dickhead and then like say you're spiritual. Like there's, context plays such an critical component of the equation. But yeah, I think it's just a really powerful thing for people to step back and slow down and evaluate these polls and ask themselves, like, is this actually true? Or is this just an inherited idea? So a lot of freedom there. But dude, I feel like we could talk for an eternity here. I do want to land this plane.
Yep.
You're up to a lot of cool things, and maybe even some things that I don't know about or the audience doesn't. So I want to just take a minute here for you to share your full host of ways that people can engage with you or follow what you're doing if this was a conversation that they feel fired up about.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. Love the conversation. And yeah, like if you guys want to chat about any of these topics, I'm always happy to geek out on it. The best place is LinkedIn. So just search for my name, Jake Housdon, on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect, DM, open for all of it. I write fairly frequently on LinkedIn, just like about what I'm up to. And then what I'm doing is building like an ecosystem around the conscious professional. And so one vehicle for that is retreats. So it all revolves around experience, community, education as like the pillars. And one vehicle is retreats. I'm designing retreats that I'm referring to as nomad retreats. And the idea is it's a retreat model that is designed with the conscious professional in mind. There's a lot of like issues with the way that retreats are set up that make them, let's just say there's areas for improvement in terms of like making it more set up for a professional to go on. So I'm working on doing a lot of that. So these will be retreats in the Amazon jungle and the Andes in Peru. Some will involve plant medicine, some won't, so I'm building in that space. I have a retreat center down in the Amazon. And then I'm building online community with a brand name In Spirit. So it's a play off of LinkedIn with the logo.
Cool. I
And
didn't
it's
know
basically, and it's a community for conscious professionals. So people who are on a path of growing professionally, but also spiritually. And like, how do they reconcile those? And it's, having a supportive tribe of people that are on the same wavelength as you. So those are the two main things. And then I'm studying and training and being initiated as a shaman. I'm going to be rolling out soon, like some of my own, healing offerings, which can be done at a distance. So like you don't need to come down to Peru and stuff like that. So that'll be revealed on my LinkedIn and stuff pretty soon. So if you want to like, remove some junk from your luminous energy field or retrieve a part of your soul or all kinds of fun stuff we can get up to. So
That's awesome. That's awesome, man. Well, love everything you're doing. Ton of alignment with kind of where I see the world going, what I'm personally interested in. So just excited to follow along and support you. And everyone for listening. We're grateful for you. I will link out all of the things that Jake just mentioned in the show notes. So make sure to check those out. And Jake, thanks again, man. This was a lot of fun.
my pleasure, Scott. It was awesome. Thank you.